No kings or queens have ever lived in the chateau. Well, the queens might be questionable, but no princes or dukes. But several minor members of the city's royalty have made their mark on it. I'm fortunate to know much of the history of the house, and although I've never found any early photographs or drawings of how it looked originally, I can pretty well piece together the changes that have been made to it in its evolution over 146 years. And thanks to the online collection of historic photographs that the Columbus Metropolitan Library and other resources offer, I've found pictures and caricatures of several of its past owners. John J. Barber, originally of Sandusky, Ohio, built the house in 1875, just 3 years after the city had annexed farmland east of East Public Lane, now Parsons Avenue, at a time when there weren't many other homes in the area. Most of the mansions that would come to identify the area as the Silk Stocking District wouldn't be built until at least 10 years later. The land where the old lunatic asylum once stood had been plotted into 3 boulevards named for historic patriotic figures and locations like Jefferson, Hamilton, and Lexington, as the city prepared to celebrate the country's centennial. And Monroe Avenue continued the theme. Barber had been admitted to the bar in 1862, but after a stint in the Union Army during the Civil War, he returned to Columbus and became a teller at First National Bank and then a bookkeeper at W.B. Brooks & Sons, a coal dealer. Meanwhile, he pursued his love of art. He was recognized in the East as a leading artist and became one of the most celebrated painters of cattle and pastoral scenes. He exhibited his work pretty widely in New Orleans, at the World Exposition in St. Louis, the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C., and one of Barber's paintings of a prize-winning cow even hung in President Taft's home. Legend has it that as people became familiar with his work and learned that he was from Columbus, the city became known as a cow town. Barber married Amy Breck from Newton, Massachusetts in 1871, and their daughter Jessie was born in 1874. Records list 47 North Monroe Avenue as a residence and studio from 1875 to 1890, when Barber's wife Amy died. Their daughter also died a few years later. After his wife's death, Barber moved to 32 South Washington Avenue in 1891 and rented space for his studio in the Wesley Block building downtown at 168 North High Street. At some point, despondent over the deaths of his wife and daughter, Barber was committed to the new lunatic asylum that had been built on a hilltop on the west side of the city, where he died by suicide with a pair of scissors in 1910 at the age of 71. Sometimes you can't help thinking that history does repeat itself. Not only do Barber and I share the same birthday, more than 100 years apart, but I also lived briefly on South Washington Avenue before I bought the house. And his photo looks exactly like my neighbor who moved next door a couple of years ago. Exactly. A few years ago, when I became lost in Greenlawn Cemetery trying to find where he was buried, I stopped the car and asked him to help me. I turned my head to look out the car window, and there was his tombstone. About this time, Rod Serling should come on and say, "You've entered the Twilight Zone." This is the only one of his paintings that I've been able to find at auction, but now that it's back home, I plan to keep it with the house and hopefully make sure it stays here in perpetuity. It's uncertain how ownership of the house transferred after Barber moved to Washington Avenue, but by 1910, James G. Westwater owned the home, according to the Columbus Citizens Telephone Directory. Born in 1877, Westwater graduated from The Ohio State University in 1902, where he was a member of Sigma Chi fraternity and became an attorney with an office at 8 East Long Street. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. James M. Westwater, lived just a few doors north at 87 North Monroe, where his sister Phoebe was married on February 20th, 1909. James G. Westwater and his wife gave a dinner party for her at their home on Valentine's Day. Westwater was active in civic and fraternal organizations and served on the board of directors of the Ohio State University Association. He died in 1935 at the age of 57 and is buried at Greenlawn Cemetery. Born in 1850, David Elijah Williams bought the house in 1912 and was responsible for the renovation that changed the original Italianate design to the colonial revival style that was popular at the time. He's the one who extended the front porch, added bathrooms, and built the rear addition that included the kitchen, sleeping porch, and attached garage, as well as the 3-bay garage off the alley. Williams was an attorney, married to Emma Eliza Reese, and collected steam engine cars that he would take to Europe by ship and motor around the continent. By the looks of his caricature, he must have had a pretty well-known reputation for it, too. Although the garage he'd built at the back of the lot was demolished before I bought the house, evidence of his love for steam engine cars remained. Each bay of the garage still has an antique iron water spigot that would bring water from the cistern in the backyard to fill the car's engines. I plan to make sure that they aren't destroyed when I rebuild a garage on the same footprint. Williams died in 1921 at the age of 71, too. Is there an omen here? Gardner Latimer was born in 1886 and purchased the house in 1917. He and his wife, Esther, lived in the house with their son only 3 years when they moved to 911 East Broad Street. Latimer was Secretary-Treasurer of the Latimer-Stevens Corporation, a manufacturer of gas meter equipment and accessories. A native of Cincinnati, Charles Fisher and his second wife, Mabel Barron Fisher, owned the home from 1923 to 1941. At the time they bought the house, Fisher was vice president and business manager of the Citizens Publishing Company, downtown at 34 North 3rd Street, publisher of the Columbus Citizen daily newspaper, which later became the Citizen Journal morning paper when it merged with the Ohio State Journal, and he later became its president. That building was demolished in 1960 to make way for the current Renaissance Columbus Hotel. Fisher died in 1939, but Mabel continued to live in the house until 1941, and still does. Mrs. Fisher taught piano lessons and would leave the back door unlocked for her students to enter. Although I've never actually seen her myself, she made her presence known when I first moved in. For example, there were several times when I would lock the back door and find it unlocked or even standing ajar when I came back into the room. And she didn't like candlesticks in the fireplace mantels for some reason, especially the one in the front parlor. Maybe she'd had some favorite tchotchkes there, but I would often find the candles moved to a nearby table. Without me saying anything about her, a medium once told me she saw her in one of the bedrooms. I think I must have appeased her when I bought the piano for the front room, because she's been pretty quiet ever since. But it's nice to know I have a quiet roommate. Maybe she'll entertain us later. The only time the house was used as a rental was when William and Juanita Brown owned it from 1942 through 1978, after living in it for several years. I've met their daughter, Karen Jones, who grew up in the house and shared a few pictures from that period. She told me that they used the original sleeping porch above the kitchen as a party room where she could entertain her friends, and that her father installed the back staircase in the mid-1950s so that the kids wouldn't have to go through the house to get food and drinks. James Bleak and his partner John Dunlap ultimately bought it in 1978 and owned it until 1991. The couple made some major enhancements to both the interior and exterior of the house. Although I know James, I was never in the house when they lived in it, and didn't even know the connection until after I'd bought it and was checking the ownership records. I've heard stories from neighbors who lived here at the time, though, that the house was like a museum inside, with so much art on the walls you could hardly tell what color the wallpaper was. A few remnants of their work remain, like the refinished floors and the faux-painted fireplace mantels and surrounds. They had decorated the dining room in chinoiserie fabrics and furniture in black, red, and gold, covered the hand-painted tile around the fireplace in flat black paint, draped fabric from ceiling hooks in each corner to the chandelier in the middle. The only evidence that remains is some of the black paint that's still embedded in the grout of the tile around the fireplace. They also used the former sleeping porch as a master suite, with the adjoining office and full bath and private, easy access to the kitchen by the back staircase. 3 successive owners lived in the house only short periods before I bought it in 2000, but Mabel Fisher has lived here through them all. Every summer, a single butterfly hangs out in the front yard and stays close by me, unafraid, when I'm mowing or working in the flower beds. Of course, it's not the same butterfly, but it's always alone and always stays close. I like to think it's the spirit of Mrs. Fisher or some other past owner, come back to enjoy the home with me, and I'm happy to share it with them. Maybe, if we're very, very quiet, we can summon Mrs. Fisher to play something for us. Let me get my infrared night vision camera set up here to see if we can capture her. Mrs. Fisher, are you there? Reveal yourself, Mabel. Play something on the piano for us. Show us, Mabel. Oh my God! Mabel Fisher's been playing the background music the whole time! The energy, the memories, and yes, the spirits of all the people who have lived in this house before me are still here. They might be gone, but the house still holds their stories. That's just one of the things I love about old houses. Within their walls, they hold the laughter, the tears, the celebrations, the worries, the dreams, and the pains of the people over the past 150 years who've shared this space. Whoa, that was a harrowing experience. I think I need a drink. I don't know about you. Today we're going to have a Black 75, which is a twist on the French 75, which isn't really French after all. It was created at Arnaud's restaurant in New Orleans, though definitely a French influence, but not from France. Black 75 is a twist on that, and then we use mulled blackberries instead of the Chambord. We add that to gin, some lemon juice, some simple syrup, and top it off with champagne. I think any drink topped up with champagne is French, right? And if you don't know how to make simple syrup, it's simple. Just stir together an equal measure of granulated sugar and water until the sugar completely dissolves over medium heat. Set it aside to cool a bit and then store it in an airtight container for about 4 weeks. I like to use this old honey jar just for fun. You can add just about any flavor to it. Cinnamon or ginger is good. If you do that, it keeps only for about a couple of weeks. And it's not that it really goes bad, but the water and the sugar start to separate and it's really not as good. Shall we open the champagne? Ah, I love that sound. So you top off the gin and the blackberries with the champagne. To Mabel Fisher, santé. Ah, it definitely takes you to another world. Thank you for joining me at the Urban Chateau. I hope to see you again in a future episode. Au revoir.